Harry's Wife, Part 87.1, The Ellen Interview. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. As many of you know, Harry's wife was recently interviewed on the Ellen Degeneres show, and this provided a useful opportunity to see a situation when two narcissists interact with one another. If you haven't already accessed it, you'll find my roast of Ellen particularly entertaining, identifying many of her behaviours, characteristics and traits, and of course you'll already be familiar with the extensive series about Harry's wife, where we've been utilising her as a prominent example to explain many facets of narcissism. The interview is one which is clearly never going to be any forensic cross-examination of Harry's wife. Indeed, this was all done as part of a facade management, the continued assertion of control over the public at large viewing the programme. Fuel will be drawn from it, and there'll be the residual benefits of possibly money if a payment exchange hands, and the maintenance of the facade being done in light of recent setbacks that have occurred, including the court case, the critical panning of what was worn at the relevant Freedom Gala, and other matters that we have referred to in parts passim. I have not been able to locate the interview in its entirety. I certainly was busy about far more important matters than to sit down and watch it when it was aired, and I haven't been able to find a corresponding outlet that enables me to watch the entirety of On Demand. Therefore, what I have done is access the Ellen YouTube channel, which has 4 fairly lengthy clips from the interview, probably representing the lion's share of it, quite possibly as much as you'd all want to stomach of watching these two in action. Therefore, the 4 clips may well be out of sequence with regard to the order that they occurred in the interview. That matters not particularly. The whole point is that these are the relevant segments and interactions that I will now analyse for the purposes of explaining to you the relevant dynamic, reactions, responses, etc. between the two of them. Prefacing that, why would both of them do this? Well, as I've just touched on, from Harry's wife's perspective, she will have seen it as a good idea for the purposes of PR. She'll have been advised that she needed to find a sympathetic interviewer to enable her to show more of the fun side of Harry's wife, to make her seem just like everybody else, accessible, a caring mum who likes a bit of fun, to make her seem more real, to try and become the people's princess that she imagines herself to be. Remember, of course, as an unaware narcissist, she's repeatedly seeking control, fuel, character traits and residual benefits, but she doesn't know that's why she's doing it. She'll be aware that this was being done for PR reasons. She'll be aware that she will be doing this to enhance her image. From Ellen's perspective, well, she's effectively persona non grata as a consequence of her show now being in its death spiral, and the fact that there were the relevant revelations about the toxicity in that workplace. And as a consequence, not that she will necessarily care given the wealth that she's accumulated, but it provided her with a further opportunity to at least get some airtime with somebody who is in the news, and therefore, similarly, although she doesn't realise it, it would also cater to control, character traits, fuel and residual benefits. Now, of course, there are two narcissists who are interacting with one another, and in some instances that can result in a collision where their attempts to fight for control over one another lead to fireworks. But in other instances, the coming together of two narcissists can actually work in harmony, and I'll be explaining in the videos how that can happen and why. Also understand that the issue of control is a fluid one, that it shifts moment by moment to moment, so that the narcissist may have control, may have control, may have control, and then there's a threat, and then has to respond. And of course, that response to the threat to control will invariably lead to a potential threat to the other narcissist control. So they're almost as this ebb and flow of behaviours. This is something to watch out for in the videos. So we'll move on to the various segments, and we're starting with the segment that's entitled about Harry's wife's new children's book started as a poem to her husband, although I understand that the clip will touch on other matters. So, into the analysis we go.
You were born and raised in Los Angeles.
I was.
What did you do? Where did you lived in Hollywood?
I did. I lived in Miracle Mile growing up, so right by LACMA, and learned how to ride my bike at the La Brea Tar Pits, all that area. And then, yeah, stayed here until I went away to college in Chicago and then came back.
I learned this about you. You made scrunchies and sold them at school.
I did, yes.
Now, how innovative of you. What did you make them out of?
Well, I would...
Pausing after 32 seconds, already we have some of the dynamic unfolding and indicators appearing. First of all, you'll notice that the rapid blinking of the eyes has returned. As I explained in an earlier part, this is something that Harry's wife frequently does, and it is in effect an anxious reaction to a threat to control. She's asked where she used to live, and that question, because it is a question, immediately poses a threat to control, because it's causing the person that is asked of to have to answer it. She can't sit there and basically refuse to answer. The facade management side of her narcissism will not allow that to take place. As a mid-range narcissist, it would only be under extreme situations of threat to control that the facade would crumble. And this isn't an extreme threat to control. And therefore the facade exercises its influence, cutting off certain options with regard to how she will assert control by reference to the threat. So some narcissists, of course, don't operate facades. So they'd swear at you, punch you, shove you, spit at you, storm off, because the facade influence isn't there. But for her it is. And therefore, while she might be wanting to leap over and jab her fingers into the eyes of Ellen or karate chop her into the throat, that just isn't going to happen. While she might be tempted to fold her arms and not want to answer certain questions, again, that's not going to happen. And therefore, an answer has to be provided. And therefore, she confirms where she lived. But just prior to that, the very question in itself threatened her control and caused the rapid eye blinking because there was a moment of anxiety as the narcissism selected the appropriate answer. Then as the conversation continues, you'll note that she basically gives a very short resume of where she had lived, and notice that when she responds, how cold the eyes are. There's a very short one smile, but the eyes are showing absolutely nothing. There's no warmth. And that's because, again in that instance, the questions that have been asked of her are threats to control. Not massive ones, not ones that can't be surmounted, but they still represent that. And because her narcissism isn't that evolved, she never is able to provide a particularly polished performance. We've seen it time and time again. The rapid eye blinking, the playing with the hair, the waving the arms around like a pissed up ninja. And that's all demonstrative of the fact that she experiences anxiety, which is a manifestation of the threat to control before the narcissism is able to kick in with something for her, with an explanation, a revision of history, deflection, whatever it might be. And then Ellen moves on with her next question, which is about saying that she had learned of Harry's wife that she used to sell scrunchies. Well, first of all, this is hardly a earth-shattering revelation. It's a little bit of fluff, but the whole interview is predicated on it being fluff, light-hearted, fun. You can see, with Ellen's question, that she's not engaged, that she's not interested. Her own narcissism isn't even causing her to make a pretense of being interested as she might be with a heavier hitter of a guest. And she makes the comment, "How innovative of you." And of course, the manner in which it's said reeks of sarcasm. and that in itself is a threat to control. You'll notice that the response of Harry's wife is to give a stupid little giggle in response to that. It wasn't said for comedic effect, but that's demonstrative again as the threat to control that she laughs because she thinks that it was a joke, when actually it wasn't. On the face of it, the comment was apparently a compliment, although it wasn't because the tone suggests that it was said in sarcasm, and it certainly wasn't said as a joke. And therefore, her reaction, taking it as a joke, is the narcissism misfiring. The sarcasm threatens control, and rather than just answer the question and override it, her response is to laugh at it because she thinks that it's a joke, because her narcissism has guided her in that manner to try and assert control. But of course, it is in congruence with what has just been said, and is demonstrative of the way that periodically Harry's wife's narcissism misfires.
Asked my mom to take me down to downtown LA where all the fabric stores are, and you could buy the remnants of fabric really affordably. So I would get some of the remnants and I'd buy the elastic and tie the knot, and I had a little sewing machine and, you know, just made scrunchies and sold them at school. This is when I was in elementary school, so I was what, 9?
That's amazing. And then did you go on to want to like sell other things, or you were just, that's the one thing you thought, oh, I can sell these?
No, it was a thing at the time, and I guess they're back now. People are wearing scrunchies again.
Portia wears scrunchies. Yeah.
So I'll bring some over and see if she wants to buy any.
Sell some to Portia. She can afford it.
Stopping at 1 minute and 6 seconds, Harry's wife continues with the absolutely riveting scrunchie creation anecdote. She talks about collecting remnants from particular stores and how she made them, and relays that, all with attendant hand gestures. And the relaying of this anecdote results in the response of, "That's amazing," from Ellen. It's not said with conviction. However, she says that as a benign method of asserting control over Harry's wife by praising her, by issuing a compliment. That's fuel to Harry's wife and isn't a threat to her either. So, at that juncture, Harry's wife receives control. She also receives fuel. Ellen has been receiving fuel because Harry's wife is talking to her, and she is moved to control in a painted white fashion because, of course, Harry's wife is just answering her questions. She's not being a curmudgeon, she's not asking questions back herself, she's not being surly, she's being compliant. And the reason that she is being compliant is because she's not being asked any difficult questions. If a serious journalist, for instance, had been putting questions to Harry's wife about recent behaviours backed up by the evidence, we would see entirely different responses. Of course, such an interview would never happen because the PR people just wouldn't let it occur. However, here, this is an individual that is not going to ask any difficult questions, and therefore, for Harry's wife, it's a supine environment for her. And it works for the two of them. The fact that Harry's wife is responding with answers means that Ellen's in control and is giving fuel to her. And then Ellen, because she's asking questions of Harry's wife, there's a momentary threat to control, but it's not a huge one because she's able to provide an answer. It's not creating a tangible difficulty for her. And when she receives a compliment such as "that's amazing," that signifies that Ellen is under control towards Harry's wife and has provided her with some fuel. And they're both benefiting from the exchange because both of them operate a facade, and therefore that facade is essentially, we're kind and nice people, look at us getting along so nicely together, so that the rest of the world that's viewing this is controlled by that, and there is a mutual interest for this to be a friendly exchange. They do, of course, always need to keep getting control over one another, and there'll be momentary threats to control, more likely to come from Ellen towards Harry's wife than the other way round because she's the interviewer. But ultimately, those threats to control are not going to be so significant that Harry's wife can't deal with them. Therefore, she is able to respond in a way which apparently makes her seem fun and down to earth, etc. For example, the scrunchy anecdote being one of those instances. And so she is able to readily achieve control while staying within the facade of apparently being a kind person. Ellen, again maintaining her facade of being a kind interviewer, is also able to do this with her soft-soap questions, and therefore it's a mutually beneficial exchange. And so thus that continues in that vein as they talk about it. And then Ellen brings in her partner, Portia, mentioning that she wears scrunchies. And at that juncture, Harry's wife suggests, oh, maybe I can sell some to her. And that suggestion is a threat to the control of Ellen. And thus she responds with, oh, yes, she can afford it, which doesn't look like it to the uninformed viewer, but in fact is a put down, because it's saying, oh, yes, we've got plenty of money. And, of course, Portia, as her intimate partner primary source, is an extension of Ellen, which means that her money is, in effect, Ellen's money. Her achievements are those of Ellen. And therefore, by treating Portia as an extension of herself, she talks about, oh yes, Portia can afford it, which is her asserting control over Harry's wife to the suggestion of selling to them. These are the very subtle little spars that are going on between the two of them. Recognise that they don't think of them as jousting with one another, they're just having a conversation. But that's what their narcissism is doing, where Harry's wife says, oh, I can sell them. That's an assertion of control towards Ellen. And then Ellen counters that, nullifying it by saying, oh yes, Portia can afford them. Thus, Harry's wife is in effect told, oh yes, we'll buy them for you. Thus, she feels like she has control unconsciously. And at the same time, Ellen has asserted control by referencing superior financial firepower, or at least a manifestation of that.
You and Harry are on the cover of Time's most influential. Congratulations. First of all, I agree. And I think, you know, when we were talking about this, actually, Halloween is how important, you know, certain issues are, and paid family leave, and that's a big one for you. And that's, and I think most women, most families can identify with how important that is.
I think people truly forget that, or don't even know that in this country, it's one of only 6 countries in the entire world, and the only wealthy nation in the entire world, that does not mandate and have a federal paid leave program. Everyone knows, especially if you've had a child, and if you haven't, you know how hard it is and how critical it is in those first few weeks, if not months, to be together as a family. And the fact that we don't offer that here is something that now, as a mom of 2, I will do everything that I can to make sure that we can implement that for people.
All right. More with Meghan after this. We're back.
Stopping at 2 minutes and 15 seconds. We started off with the fluff about the scrunchie anecdote, and then there's a sudden shift as we're onto the Time magazine cover. And notice at this point that Ellen stumbles somewhat as she tries to talk about it. And the reason for that is that the appearance of the cover, because it involved Harry's wife in a prominent position, is a threat to control. And that causes her own narcissism to struggle to find something, and therefore she opts for simple congratulations, which is her way, by way of passing on a compliment and congratulations, a benign method of asserting control over Harry's wife to deal with the threat posed by the appearance of the picture and the prominence that it recognises. And, of course, up comes the cover, and then nothing is said more about it. And it's almost like that's a pre-agreed aspect of the show, whereby the cover has to be shown and has brief mention made of it, box ticked. And barely had the audience had time to whoop and cheer in their clearly staged manner, that we are then moved on to a completely different topic, and it segues somewhat clumsily into the issue of paid parental leave. And at this juncture, this provides an opportunity for Harry's wife to showcase this issue about which she repeatedly bangs the drum. And she comes out with the usual statement that she's made in similar circumstances, and therefore, of course, because of the cognitive function and the level of narcissist that she is, she has nothing particularly new or meaningful to say about it. And of course, there's another missed opportunity to perhaps ask her about why are you behind this when you don't have a proper job and you haven't taken paid, you claim you've had parental leave, but from what? Or to ask her about her behaviours in contacting the senators. But of course, those key questions are never going to be asked because this is not an interview that is designed to be confrontational or indeed forensic in the slightest. The response of Harry's wife is somewhat word salady. She talks about people in America have either truly forgot or don't even know. Well, which one is it? And then she says, everyone knows if you've had a child or if you haven't. Well, if everybody knows, then you said earlier that they don't even know. So everybody knows then. And then if you've had a child or even if you haven't. And this demonstrates that the polish that she lacks, that she's not particularly articulate. And then we get the staged comment that she usually trots out with regard to paid parental leave. And at that juncture, she's issued her little speech there for the 45 seconds or so as it was, and Ellen begins to clap and the audience whoop and a holler. So that all signals that Harry's wife has control. Facade is maintained, she receives fuel from that reaction, and then all of a sudden, we're on to a break. So Ellen has nothing to say further about it, no questions to ask. It was quite simply, once again, quite clear that the arrangement was to allow Harry's wife to say something about it, to demonstrate that she is this advocate for paid parental leave, that she's a good person, so that it enhances her facade management. No questions about how should this be implemented, no questions about what's the cost of it, what its parameters should be, no questions about how you're actually going to achieve it, what's your master plan for ensuring that this is achieved. Just simply, again, this is what I want to do. The speech, but there's nothing behind it, no substance, all about the words but not the action. And again, that's the economy of her narcissism in action, just talking about what she wants to happen to make her look good with no actual delivery behind it. And the fact that the segment moves straight on to a commercial break demonstrates that this was again just another tick box exercise. And so we've had get the Time magazine cover in, get paid parental leave in, good, that's done, let's move on. And you can see that the clapping of Ellen and her expression on her face is one of complete disinterest. She, of course, is just about going through the motions for the purpose of facade management, but could well be thinking inside, I don't give a rat's ass about all of this. And her cognitive empathy causes her to exhibit the appearance of, oh, this is a good cause to get behind, with the clapping and the nodding, but it's hardly vigorous, and there's no comments of why she believes that it is important. There's no observations that she might bring to the party about it, because she isn't that interested in it. She's merely allowing Harry's wife to have the platform to talk about it, as part of the agreement, no doubt, made prior to the interview. And then, on to the commercial break. Join me in 87.2 for further analysis of this particular segment of the interview.